The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
I think this will be the 5th holiday episode if I planned everything right. And the theme is just kind of a strange one. It's hostage taking, hostages for the holidays. Not all of them occur at the holidays. This one occurs shortly thereafter. I don't think it would be complete if we didn't have a New York case. You know, New York is largely one of the centerpieces of the world, kind of.
It is, yeah.
So I picked one, but I picked an older one. I do know that there was a documentary about this one released in the past couple of years. Our sources for this, weirdly enough, there was a couple of good Guardian articles. There were several New York Times articles. The Village Voice covered this. And I think the New York Daily News is where I pulled this last piece from. This takes place a very long time ago. And when I say very long time ago, it's 1973. I don't know how many people are super familiar with New York, but Brooklyn, New York, is the most populous of what are known as the five boroughs. And it's become even more popular in recent years. It's sort of located on the furthest west part of what would be Long Island. We've certainly covered quite a few cases from Long Island, and it butts up against Queens, New York. I don't know how many people actually live in Brooklyn, New York. I don't know, if you could ever really get an accurate population size, but I've always assumed that it's a couple million people.
I have no idea how many people are in Brooklyn.
Well, I was just going to point out one of the statistics I pulled said that there were 40,000 people per square mile, and that number is very large.
Well, yeah, I mean, depending on what your background is, however you grew up, I mean, it can be startling, right?
Right.
But it's also where everything's happening, right?
That's what I was going to say. So they're all there because they want to be doing the things that are sort of central. And it really is if you're networking in a lot of industries, New York is sort of the hub of that.
And some people, they've lived in New York their whole life and they don't know any sort of different life. I have not lived the big city life for any substantial amount of time, and I find it to be smothering.
It is a little bit. It definitely. I've lived in cities a little bit here and there, but not for any substantive length of time, just like you were saying. But it always takes an adjustment period that I don't always make it through the adjustment period. Sometimes I'm it's just not cut out. This is going to be 52 years ago that we're talking. And the setting for this is near the border of the neighborhoods of Bushwick and Bedford-Stuy. These are really popular neighborhoods in Brooklyn. They're mentioned in a lot of popular media today. But this is a sporting goods store called John and Al Sports. It was originally located at 927 Broadway. So it would have been a quarter into Bushwick and 3/4 into Bed-Stuy. The store had been open at the time of our story for almost 40 years. According to the owners and the articles that I was just mentioning, and I will say that one of these quotes came out of the Wall Street Journal, there were robberies at this store about every 90 days. So that, I don't know if that comes later, or if it's just like that the whole time. The founder, a guy named Spielberger, was killed during a robbery in 1967. So by 1973, two guys, Samuel Rosenblum and Jerry Riccio, they had taken over the store after Spielberger had passed away. And for the setting of this story, we're going to talk a lot about New York's finest, because that's the nickname for the New York Police Department. There are several people at the time who get involved from the perspective of being part of the police department. And this is a longer hostage situation than some of the other stuff we've talked about. It's not as long as like the riot situations, but for it to be straight up hostage situation, it is kind of long. It starts out January 19th around 5 p.m. So this is a Friday, and four gentlemen are going to enter John and Al Sports. Their names are Shalub Abdar Rahim, Dalda Rahman, Yusuf Abdallah Amosadig, and Saleh Alil Abdullah. They enter the store, and by all accounts, they're shopping. They're browsing, looking around in different aisles. But after a few minutes, they all converge and they pull out weapons. They specifically pull out a sawed-off shotgun and 3 handguns. Sawed-off shotguns are any type of shotgun that have a shorter gun barrel, less than 18 inches. A lot of times they will have instead of a traditional shoulder stock, they'll have a pistol grip. They are not literally sawed off. They're just too short. Sometimes the barrels are just replaced, and sometimes they're manufactured that way to meet the legal definitions of a shotgun. Depending on where you are in time in the United States and jurisdiction, usually that type of shotgun is illegal. So they start referring to each other as 1, 2, 3, and 4 as opposed to their names. And they demand firearms and ammunition from the counter of this sporting goods store, which I found that very interesting, because you're coming in with guns that you clearly have your guns. Why would you then be demanding guns? But we quickly find out that what they want is rifles. So they arm themselves up with additional weapons from the glass case and the walls of this store, including some rifles. Now, around 5:30 p.m., the 90th Precinct in New York, the police department, they're alerted by the store's silent alarm. And shortly after the silent alarm is starting to be responded to, there's a student from the local high school at Bushwick High School who's in the store when this happened, but they were able to get out. So the first responding officers, they arrive within 12 minutes. All 4 of these gentlemen, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they exit the store on Melrose Street, and they are using Rosenblum, one of the store's owners at this time, as a human shield. So Samuel Rosenblum is being sort of dragged along here. The police confront all 4 of them, and there is an exchange of gunfire. Based on records, it's unclear if they ever figure out who fired the first shots. But during this exchange, Officer Jose Adorno from the New York Police Department's 90th Precinct is struck in the arm. And while it's happening, Mr. Rosenblum manages to escape. Now, one of the things that happens that is sort of problematic is number 3, Yusuf Al-Musadig, is struck in the abdomen. When this happens and Rosenblum escapes, they don't have their human shield anymore. 1, 2, 3, and 4 go back into the store. And it's pretty quickly figured out that in this store, as they're barricading themselves in, they have 12 hostages with them. There are multiple shootouts between them and these officers that are arriving from the New York Police Department. This prompts the activation and deployment of what is now known as the Special Operations Bureau of the New York Police Department. At the time, this would have been the Emergency Service Unit. I don't think they still call themselves that. I don't think they still call themselves the Emergency Service Unit, but they may. This was established in July of 1925 by then Police Commissioner Richard Enright. He called it the Emergency Automobile Squad. And for a time, officers were really assigned to foot patrols, but these were the guys who had squad cars. And that's where the name squad car comes from in terms of police services, is they had 4 units. So they had Squad 1, Squad 2, and Squad 1 dealt with Manhattan and the Bronx. Squad 2 dealt with Brooklyn and Queens. And way back then, they were staffed by a total of 50 officers. I think today they have close to 400 officers handling affairs up in New York for the ESU, or the Special Operations Unit. This gunfire is chaotic. Since this has all happened, lots of these officers that were involved and were observers that day, they've written stories about this. There's a couple of books that have come out. They called it, kind of collectively, a war zone. One officer specifically recalls in his memoir that he came under fire almost immediately upon arriving to the scene. And he returned fire from his police car, and he was basically just shooting in the general direction of the store. He didn't yet know that there were hostages involved. So that was another problem that happens.
Right. So what we have is them coming into the establishment, right?
Yeah.
They're grabbing what they want. The police are already responding because of the silent alarm, and then they're leaving with a human shield. And that's correct, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what they were going to take was done.
Yeah, this was actually over when they come out with Samuel Rosenblum. Yeah.
Right. And so I think somebody accidentally fired.
Are you like picking a side of who fired, or are you just saying?
I would say more than likely it was the perpetrators.
That's what I'm betting too, yeah. One of the new guns they procured during this robbery.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because typically, if it had been one of the police officers, I assume even in 73, they had a means to communicate, right? Mm-hmm. With one another, as far as okay, because when police are acting,
there were radios, yeah,
in that capacity, everybody knows what's going on. And I think that it makes the most sense that somebody accidentally shot off one of the guns they had just stolen. But because of the tension in the situation, it exploded into what you were talking about from the memoir, where all of a sudden there's everybody's shooting because nobody knew what was happening.
Right. So our first major casualty, although we've had some injuries, occurs around 6:10 p.m. One of the officers from the Emergency Services Unit named Stephen Gilroy, he's 29 years old. He takes a position behind an elevated railway pillar for cover. And while he's doing this, he's shot in the head, presumably by one of the rifles that have been procured during this robbery. As Officer Frank Carpenter moves into position to try and pull Stephen Gilroy back, he's shot in the knee. He was physically moving his body, and then he changed his mind, decided to move his car. So I think the only thing that was exposed that they could shoot was his knee. He ends up being rescued by other members of the ESU team. And at this point in time, so we're an hour and 10 minutes into what's happening here. And the emergency services team has moved into position to lay down what's known as suppressive fire. So basically, they are just kind of firing at what they can see, even though there's hostages involved, in order to extract some of these officers.
It's to keep them from firing back, basically. Like,
Correct. I was just going to say, this has an interesting effect in that once they fire here between 6:10 and 6:20 p.m., the New York Police Department is not going to fire another shot for the rest of the standoff.
that's another reason that I think that it probably wasn't the police.
Right. They're exercising quite a bit of control in as far as the police go and what they're doing.
Now, I don't think Officer Gilroy's, I don't think that one was an accident. Somebody aimed at him, but I think it all started, and, we've talked about that before. There was a bank robbery where I felt like somebody accidentally hit the trigger and then everybody else in the facility with a gun shot as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can totally see that happening here.
Yeah. I had a case last year into this year that involved 4 people sitting in a car, and the car lurched forward at an inopportune time, and there was a person standing outside the car reaching in. It was a drug transaction. The person reaching in was reaching in. They were passing off a phone to do like digital Cash App stuff, and he noticed that the person he was handing it to had an AR-15 style pistol laid out that was not visible before. This is taking place at night. And he goes to grab the gun as the car lurches. There's a single shot fired from that gun, and it doesn't really hit anybody. It just goes and it makes a loud noise. But it causes a chain reaction in the car, and someone sitting in the rear, like the driver's side passenger seat in the back, fires and kills that man outside of the car just because of like the chaos.
Right. And that was I feel like in that situation, they only had guns in the event that there was some sort
Correct.
of problem. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, when there's no cash, obviously, if they're doing digital transactions, there's still the product. Right.
Yeah.
Which could be taken. But all of that was just like a misunderstanding, basically, right?
Right. I suspect there was a little bit of a ripoff going on, and like something was happening that was delaying the final transaction. But whatever was happening there, it is still kind of what you were saying. Like the shooting had nothing to do with the transaction itself. The guns were there for safety.
I learned something at some point in time and I could be completely wrong. I just feel like a lot of people want to have a gun just in case.
Yeah.
And a lot of situations that occur are responsive to an accidental trigger pull or something. Well, I guess it would be an accidental trigger pull no matter what, but you can be startled and pull the trigger, right?
Yeah.
Even though especially when we're talking about people who aren't trained necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Because that is the response that you would have, like when you're on alert. This is all me speculating and assuming certain things. Like if you've got a gun just for protection, I personally, like if I pull out my gun from where I keep it, I'm going to shoot somebody until it's empty. And so I've never pulled the gun out, right?
Right.
And so I'm not in a position where I'd be in a car with a gun and, so I could be wrong. But my thought is if you have it on you, you're not necessarily trained to not pull the trigger, right?
Yeah.
It can really set things off. And I think that happens so many times.
It does. It is speculation, but it's educated speculation. Guns that are openly displayed have one effect. Guns that are discovered during some other type of interaction have a different kind of effect. Guns change the tension in the atmosphere of any situation.
The control and the power, right?
Yeah, and it's like, it is, in my opinion, an automatic escalation, frequently where no escalation needed to be at all.
I think with like, I guess social media, or at least people having I guess it is social media, people having the ability to capture stuff happening and then putting it out there has led us to see that, right? Especially with police officers. And I would say it could be any police officer, even police officers that are trained, they can get so hyped up that like they shoot people that all they were doing was nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a reaction. It's not like the cop was like, I'm going to kill you and shoots them. It's like they respond that way because maybe their training wasn't that great, or they just have the wrong mindset, right?
Yeah. It's so the early 70s tag onto that with lots of new and interesting things happening. Like we had escalating hostage crises happening. And I think that ties into it all from the perspective of you started to see people who normally didn't have guns having guns. And I want to say that kind of in the wake of all of that, gun crime became this whole new thing where people who normally wouldn't have guns at all had them for protection. And then people who were committing crimes that maybe would have had one gun, suddenly everyone is armed. You were saying like the differences in training. I think it's also just that like some people don't have a really good situational awareness of how serious something is. And an overreaction can come from either side. It can come from the side of the people who are allegedly the good guys, the people who are allegedly the bad guys, just because they don't understand what's unfolding in front of them.
Right, exactly. And most of the time it's either a reaction, right? A startled response, or it's from a place of fear, right?
Correct.
And it's usually not necessary. I saw a lot of startling things as social media evolved and we got to see things with cops in actions besides just on like cops, right? But again, I think you're right. I do think it's a situational thing, but that goes back to training, right?
Correct.
Still.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And in this case, I didn't know. It's a completely different story, but part of the reason why these men were arming themselves was because of a different thing that had just happened to a group of Sunni.
Correct. And so there's several pieces of this that are going to come into play. I'm going to take us to 7:05 p.m. and then we're going to address some of those things. One of the things that the New York Police Department was doing is they are establishing a perimeter around this location. They set up a command post that is just down from the sporting goods store, and they, for various reasons, have like sub-command posts set up along Broadway. This is all taking place on Broadway in New York. So by 7:05 p.m., there's a safe perimeter set up. They are setting up some interesting stuff, and that is the officers are shooting out the streetlights because it's going to start getting dark in New York around this time. And at some point in time, I have not found a good source for when they do it, but they cut the power to this area, to this block. So that's some of the things that they're doing. But we realize there are some reactive things going on in the community, and the New York Police Department is suddenly discovering they have no idea how to negotiate a crisis. So to give you an example of what's happening in the background of all this, because they don't have like a fixed standard operating procedure for all of it. A guy named Harvey Schlossberg is a traffic officer, and the police commissioner at the time, Patrick Murphy, he finds out that Schlossberg, even though he's a traffic officer, he has a doctorate in clinical psychology. So he gets elevated pretty quickly to the role of the police department's head psychologist.
At least it was logical.
Things that were taking place in the headlines, other riots and hostage takings, some stuff that had happened internationally. I think in 1972, we would have had the Munich incident. The police department is thinking, we're the center of the world. We've got to do more about this. And Schlossberg was not on board with like the contemporary police procedures when it came to things like hostage rescue. Now, what they did at the time sort of focused on close quarters and urban combat and deadly force. And the emphasis that the New York Police Department had literally moments before Harvey Schlossberg became their head psychologist were on defeating anyone who was taking hostages as opposed to saving hostages. And the way that that was known in the world was that cops would not negotiate with, quote, killers. That not negotiating with killers came from the same mindset that we know today as we don't negotiate with terrorists, which sort of used as a trope in movies all the time. According to records, Harvey Schlossberg promoted an introspective approach, believing that there was a way for what we now know as a crisis negotiator or a hostage negotiator to form a bond with hostage takers, to analyze them through conversation and attempt to find solutions to problems where they could then focus on a peaceful resolution wherein the hostages could be rescued as opposed to killed in the crossfire, which was what was happening previously. He also believed that patience and subterfuge would allow them to control a standoff. And if you allowed the crisis negotiators to control the standoff, the criminals would make more mistakes. And they would also give time to the hostage takers to inadvertently develop bonds with the hostages. And the belief was, if you did that, then they would be less likely to harm people that they were bonded with. So a day before this, since you mentioned Sunni Muslims, 7 Hanafi Sunni Muslims had been murdered by the Black Mafia in Washington, D.C. This is because an associate of Malcolm X had begun to essentially voice opposition to the Nation of Islam. So these perpetrators, we're going to find out, are all people who are, like you said, they're African American, they're Sunni Muslims, and they are also opposed to the Nation of Islam. They're going to have some very interesting things to say at the end of all this, the ones that, are still with us. And the idea of why they're acquiring the weapons turns out to be quite weird. So the NYPD, around 7:15 p.m., they have decided that they're going to go with Harvey Schlossberg's techniques, and they're going to try and reason with these hostage takers. They're going to use some element of empathy and patience to coerce them into releasing these hostages and surrendering. This pisses off the ESU guys at the scene. They're mad because they've already lost Officer Stephen Gilroy and Frank Carpenter. He has been injured, and ultimately they want some kind of retribution for this having happened. Now, there was a second NYPD psychologist, and he had recommended that what they should do is figure out how to get the ESU guys close enough to throw some tear gas in the store. So these are very different perspectives, if that makes sense.
They're completely opposite, but in some ways, you have to keep in mind, you don't want to start a war, right?
Right.
This is a situation where they've taken people hostage, and the end of that is that they are punished in a court of law for it, right?
Right.
Now, that's a long way around your elbow to get to your thumb. I can see the perspective of just wanting to storm them, tear gas them, shoot them, whatever, and that maintains their control and position, right?
Right.
But also, it's destructive, and whoever's in charge makes the call. And in this case, it seems anyway like they probably made the right call.
Right. One of the mistakes that the hostages have made, because remember, they didn't plan to be here very long. They were getting these weapons and they were getting out, and now we're moving towards 8 p.m. But one of the mistakes they made is they cut or ripped out or disabled the store's phone lines. So you end up with a crisis negotiator for the New York Police Department yelling through a megaphone to communicate with them. Now, this does work to a degree because they get a hostage out around 8 p.m. She tells the police that the hostage takers would kill the other hostages if they're not allowed to leave. So they're using this first hostage as a messenger. 9 p.m. comes, and the guys in the store indicate that they need a doctor. And this becomes like a sticking point in the negotiation, because basically the NYPD says, we'll get you a doctor, we'll get you medical treatment, but we're going to need you to surrender. And they don't want to do that because they feel like this does not end well for them. And they're not wrong. While this is happening, the NYPD has an emergency rescue vehicle. It's actually an APC, or an armored personnel carrier. I've seen it said that it was nicknamed Annie. And so it's this large vehicle that basically had been decommissioned in the 60s from the U.S. Army. And they're using this APC to move along the streets and to get people who are sort of in the line of fire from the hostage takers away. Like some of the officers that got into the wrong position, civilians who have been trapped either along the streets behind cars or in other stores that are sort of in the line of fire. They're moving them out. So they do this from 9 p.m. to about 11:15 p.m. Like they move it up and down the street, pulling people out. And the hostage takers are taking shots at the ERV, at Annie, but they don't hit their marks. They're just like basically pinging bullets to ricochet off of the side of this armored personnel carrier. So the police do understand that there's some value in this armored personnel carrier being present, because it draws the hostage takers' focus and they become preoccupied with what is that thing going to do. So they started using it for the negotiations they were trying to do. They would bring the armored personnel carrier up close to the proximity of the storefront. Personally, I am convinced that this is the moment where demilitarized equipment became a big deal for police departments because of how it was used in New York. And this is a particularly like public moment, well-documented moment where that happened. I do not believe in using this type of stuff for police forces. I think it's terrible. I think they're not wrong in what they're saying here, but like that's not how we should be dealing with things. Our police are not meant to be military members.
They're not. I do agree that like they used it to rescue some of the people in the middle, right? The bystanders or whatever. And so I feel like it could be used for something like that. I don't know, because my thought is that they wanted the perpetrators to think that like if at any second that thing could come like running through the store and roll right over them, right? Yeah. That's weird. That's a weird concept. I do think though that you said that like, none of this was planned for. They were already out of the store with what they were going to steal, right?
Correct.
And so nobody's operating off of any sort of plan at this point, right?
Right. There's a lot of improv going on here. Like the police send in elevated train cars with no lights, and they use this because, in close proximity to the store and not exactly in the line of fire, but close enough that they're concerned about it. There are stranded passengers who were never able to get on a train because the trains were shut down running through this area when this all happened. There are residents in nearby apartments, nearby establishments. There was a bar, a pool hall, and I think a diner. There are people that were like figuring out ways to get themselves out of being held here. And so you have two kind of weird things happening. One is the general order is if you live in an apartment nearby, stay inside, like it's one of those lock your doors situations. And then if you're stuck somewhere, shelter in place, which is much more common now than it was back then. But then also they're going in to rescue and pull people away from the line of fire.
Right. And it's my experience, which isn't a lot, that as soon as you tell somebody that's sitting very happily eating their dinner or playing pool with their friends that they can't leave, all they want to do is leave.
Yep. You are 100% correct. If they had left it alone, like it wouldn't have been a problem, I in my opinion. But like the moment that you are telling them they can't leave, that's when it happens. We're now moving into the overnight hours, because by the time they like finish up these rescues, like the last and interesting ones are happening between 11 and midnight. And some of these hostages are starting to sleep. Like they're in a sporting goods store, they're pulling out camping mats, camping cots, sleeping bags, and there is documentation that like they're basically sleeping at gunpoint in this area of the store that's right in the middle, kind of out of the line of fire of police. I think it would be called a mezzanine, but it's like one of those like in between floors. It looks in the pictures like maybe it's for displays, but I could be totally wrong on that because I'm not familiar with this particular store.
It's giving at least one of the perps a bird's eye view so the hostages don't do something, right?
Correct.
Like they're just laying there sleeping in their cot or whatever they found in the store.
Right. And while that's happening, we still have like activity going on. So as midnight rolls over, we get close to 1 a.m. and they release another hostage. This hostage is carrying a note urging Muslims to unite, and they're also carrying requests for food and medical attention. By around 4 a.m, they've brought in Reverend Roy Brown, who is from a neighborhood church, and they got him inside the ERV kind of shouting and using the megaphone, attempting to negotiate with the people inside. I have no idea why they did that. That is wild to me that they would bring a Christian pastor into this mix.
Well, a lot of times, I don't know anything about Reverend Roy Brown, but a lot of pastors can have a calm and patient
demeanor.
Yeah, and even, because, in Christianity at least, like Christians aren't taught to hate Muslim people just because they're Muslims, right?
Correct.
I'm not sure that a lot of Christians realize the opposite
is not always true.
It's not always reciprocated, and it could be seen as actually like an aggravating thing to do, depending on the situation. But I think they were just looking for anybody because, again, they don't know what to do. So they're doing this patience and coercion, come out and surrender type thing. But I have a feeling most of the police officers there are very antsy.
Yeah.
It is interesting the FBI doesn't show up, though. Do they?
Eventually, they're going to like come into play here. They don't have the presence that we see like in modern times. The 2025 FBI presence is different than the 1995, and that's definitely different than the 1973.
Sure, yeah. I'm just saying that Reverend Roy Brown, he was like, let me give it a shot. And they were like, okay.
Yeah. So they do this, and it's like the middle of the night when this is happening, early morning. They do try again around 5 a.m. and they get a little progress by they pull people in from the local mosque, which is actually pretty smart, in my opinion. I don't know that they're all like the same exact mindset, but they do bring in 3 prayer leaders from one of the local mosques. And not only do they get a little progress, one of the prayer leaders is allowed to go into the store and speak with the hostage takers. Now, he comes back out less than 10 minutes later, and he makes a statement to police that he believes the hostage takers are willing to die for Allah. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But it creates a little bit more of a rift with the crisis negotiators. And Schlossberg is literally going to argue that that can't be true. He believes it's a bluff. And he backs that up by pointing out the requests that they've made in writing for medical care and food.
I think there's 2 different concepts at play there that would go way beyond the wheelhouse of our Home for the Holidays hostage edition.
Yeah.
As far as like the sort of long-term, I'm willing to die for my beliefs. Maybe not right this second though, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that could have been, I do think that trying to get medical attention and wanting food and such, I don't think that shows like a suicidal terrorist, right?
I tend to agree. Probably some argument to be made for like wanting to keep him alive, but I can't make it rationally. I think I'm with you, but basically.
It is interesting though that they had like a completely third party person and a prayer leader from, I think they call them imams.
Yeah, that's a prayer leader from the local mosque. That's the title they would have. Yeah.
They let him come in the store, speak with them, and leave.
Correct.
Which is actually like the exact opposite of usually anything that occurs in a hostage situation, right?
It is, and like it would be a huge no-no today. I can see why it happened out of desperation because you're moving into, once you get to the point that like you're 12 hours in, like it is very difficult to like the outcomes start getting a little out of control.
Well, not to mention the fact this is going against what like every single, well, I'm not going to say every single one, but the majority of the cops at the scene, it's going against all of their instincts.
Yes.
To like wait it out. They're like, this is taking forever. Let's just kill everybody and be done with it. But that's war, that's not criminal justice, right?
Right. It gets weird. A megaphone is like given out to them. They're not really using it anymore. The 20th, which is a Saturday, has like a series of events, but the day really doesn't
Doesn't make progress.
Yeah, it doesn't have like advancing progress. It just kind of doesn't get worse. So at 9:25 in the morning, they bring these guys that are prayer leaders from the local mosque back. Nothing happens. Like they don't respond at all. By 11:15, like the police are kind of thinking maybe there's something wrong with the megaphone and they can't communicate with us. So they send up a walkie-talkie. The deputy commissioner, who is sort of like in charge of the shit show at this point, a guy named Ben Ward, he like is speaking through the walkie-talkie. And at that point, the walkie-talkie and the megaphone are thrown out to the front of the store. There's no progress in the morning. By 3 p.m., a couple of lawyers, including Gerald Lefcourt, who is a really high-profile American criminal defense attorney. People today may or may not know this. He was going to be Jeffrey Epstein's attorney. He was his attorney. Sanford Katz is there. They are offering, like from kind of behind the AMI, the armored personnel carrier, that they will represent them and they will like zealously defend what is happening here. And
isn't that such an interesting approach?
It is. It's a very interesting approach.
Because you're literally contradicting exactly why they're standing there with the hostages. They don't want to suffer the consequences of their crime, right?
No.
That went from stealing guns to killing a police officer and holding all these people hostage, right?
Right.
And so to me, it's weird. I don't know who came up with the idea. Again, they're throwing everything at the wall. But to me, it probably irritated them more than anything.
Right. And it seems to like get worse. They shoot at the armored personnel carrier when this is offered out.
Which is exactly what I would expect them to do, because they're like, trial? We don't need anybody to represent us at trial. We're leaving here without being in trouble.
Yeah. Don't you see the guns we have? So, but the lawyers, before they're, taken away, they do say, hey, take the walkie-talkie that's like now sitting in the front of the store. And as the armored personnel carrier, because remember, they're using this to manipulate them. It's coming up. Negotiations begin. It backs away. They see what happens. So it backs away, and a hostage is sent out to get the walkie-talkies. So shortly after 3:15 p.m., the walkie-talkie is used to request sandwiches and cigarettes and medical supply. So they approve sending in food, and they approve sending in the cigarettes. But the medical supplies are once again, like the condition is, if you want like medical treatment, you have to surrender. It is said at this point in multiple news reports, it is only like a single line in like the actual paperwork that there are relatives of the hostage takers on scene, and that these relatives are being brought up in the armored personnel carrier, given the walkie-talkie, and we don't know what is said or what happens, but I can tell you that it doesn't stop the hostage situation. Around 4 p.m., Thomas Matthews, who's a doctor, and he is the head of the Interfaith Hospital, which is located in Brooklyn, New York. It's a full-service, not-for-profit community hospital. I think it has 300 beds. I know at one point I read that like it takes thousands of patients a year. He shows up with a nurse, and like it's explained to us through news reports that he's been brought there by the NYPD. What they have done is Schlossberg and the NYPD have put together this offer that they're going to treat Al-Musaddiq. He's the guy who was shot in the abdomen when they were originally trying to leave. If he's brought out, and like some actual negotiations begin, the hostage takers say They will release a hostage in exchange for the doctor and the nurse to come in and treat Al-Musaddiq. And they can also serve as intermediaries or sort of messengers. So some time passes. Everybody like talks about it. There's sort of this active task force forming in the background. And the New York Police Department agrees. This exchange is made. And Dr. Matthews and the nurse go in. They spend 45 minutes inside. They come back out. They have the names and telephone numbers of the 9 people that are remaining because they had 12 to begin with. 3 have been released, 9 remaining hostages. And around this time, the sandwiches and the cigarettes arrive and they're placed outside the store. So at this point, we're getting into the early evening. We're now 24 hours into this thing. And the people that are showing up to help the NYPD are the FBI and other psychologists and many other groups of people. There's this odd contingent that's mentioned repeatedly in the news report, so I looked them up to see what they did. They are people who were hired by airlines and airports to respond to hijackings. So they're another form of crisis negotiator, which is interesting because that means that, you have these, I'm sure the mayor is there and his staff. I'm sure that all of the brass from the police department are here. You've got the Federal Bureau of Investigation involved. You have these people that are negotiating hijackings. And I say all of that to say it's interesting because they're still not planning to kick the doors in and shoot these guys 24 hours in.
Well, right. And to me, which I wasn't there, but, Monday morning quarterbacking all day long, to me, you're bringing in like all the most important positioned people to deal with a bunch of petulant children.
Right. One of the crazy things that happens here is Schlossberg points that out. And he also points out that we don't want to assault them. Because of their vulnerable position and what's happening here, they will be hailed as martyrs. And we will end up seeing copycats of this. So he actually tells his supervisors on Saturday that one of the best things they can do is if this is not going our way, we will let them go in exchange for the hostages to be let go. So they start even making a plan to seriously consider how they would let them go. And it's to the point that like the Port Authority Police Department is like being brought into this little mini task force they have going. And they're going to drive these people to JFK, to the airport, so that they can leave the U.S. It's never offered up seriously because like there's some other issues that are gonna come up with these hostage takers, but they are doing it from the perspective of we will do whatever we can to save these 9 lives. And I find that very interesting that they're doing that. They do let the doctor back in towards the end of the day on the 20th. So Dr. Matthews goes back in. He takes another round of medical supplies and he takes orange juice. Now, he doesn't come out quite as quickly, and about half an hour later, they send the nurse in because they're realizing that the batteries are dying on the walkie-talkie. So they send the nurse in to him with a field telephone, which is like another piece of military gear. People would picture it's like a backpack with a phone handle on it, and I guess in today's age it's been replaced by the SATCOM phone. But at the time, it was like one of the most unique types of communications we had. So they send that in. They leave the store around 11:40, so they spend a lot of time in here. And Dr. Matthews lets everyone know that the wounded hostage taker, Al-Musaddiq, he has a fever. And he believes that like his injury is potentially leading to infection. And like there's a strong chance that like the bullet, the injury, everything together is possibly going to kill him if he does not get actual medical treatment. There's only so much he can do walking in and out of this store. So they also bring with him a letter. This letter is from the hostage takers, and it's written in Arabic. And according to this, it says, telling all oppressed people to fight against their oppressors. So that seems to be a message they're trying to send out about it. But it also states that the perpetrators are sorry that Officer Gilroy was killed. They learned that he was killed from a radio they're listening to the news broadcast inside the store. They insist at this point in this note that the NYPD fired first and that Gilroy's death was them simply leveling the playing field for Almosaddegh having been shot in the abdomen. So Schlossberg looks over all of this, and now he's really in the hot seat. We're over 24 hours into a hostage situation taking place in the city of New York. And he says to his bosses that he believes these people were very early in the process of any kind of radicalization they may be going into related to this argument with the Nation of Islam. And he specifically says they had not really formulated their own ideologies. They were now tying this robbery to these vague causes that had been in the headlines. And it was just rationalization. It was a way for them to say that, like, okay, this is why we did that. But it wasn't really based in reality. That's according to Schlossberg. So now we move into January 21st. It's a Sunday. The barrier that has been set up, like, around this starts to shrink. They actually bring in barbed wire to prevent fleeing. And the New York Police Department, which I don't have a good sense of timing on this. They actually have an aviation unit in 1973, and it comes over and takes aerial photographs of the store for planning. And
That would be like the helicopter, right?
it's a helicopter, yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason they would do this, for everyone out there, they're planning on assaulting the building. So something tips these guys off. Don't know what it is. But the perpetrators, around 7:45 in the morning, I don't know if they see the helicopter, the shadow of the helicopter, if they hear it or what, but they pick a parked police car and some of the stores that are in that line of fire I talked about, and they fire 9 shots. There are attempts made to call them on the field phone that they have, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, the task force that's developed in the background has started shifting away from Schlossberg's way of thinking, and they are starting to look at ways to assault the sporting goods store. They have come up with 4 things they think they might want to do. One is they're considering using charges of explosives on the store or using a wrecking ball. They're also considering going back to the tear gas idea, where they would put the tear gas inside and incapacitate the perpetrators. And they're trying to figure out if they can access somehow the store from below. Now, I don't know if they thought there was going to be tunnels, because I've always heard that in certain neighborhoods in New York, there's lots of underground space. I always picture sewers and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles type lair. But I don't know why they do this, but the emergency services unit think, all right, we'll come in from underneath. And they start focusing on that. So they begin moving drilling equipment into this furniture store that shares a wall with the sporting goods store. So I guess they're thinking we're going to drill in and over to get from one building to the next and sneak up on them. So one of the interesting things happening in New York Sunday morning is the same thing that would happen today if something like this were going on. People are starting to gather and stare. And they've moved that barricade and perimeter in because they're trying to shrink the size of the scene. And doing that means that they now have a ton of people right behind where the police officers are all working. So the news, the media, the papers, and the word of mouth is talking about this. Multiple people show up. People are standing on cars to try and get a look at what's happening. To be honest with you, this is one of the worst things that can happen in a hostage situation, is that you develop an audience. And this crowd, this audience, this group of spectators is going to become the source of a lot of problems. And for example, in the summaries I've seen, you've got photographers attempting to take photos and flashes going off, and police are attempting to set up, parts of their plan. They misinterpret those flashes as muzzle fire, and they start checking themselves for injuries. And the next thing they do is they start breaking the crowd into those are the spectators and here's the journalists, and they start moving the journalists, kind of corralling them to nearby. And you have people showing up that, as you do with a lot of weird things in the world, who are there to defend and support the hostage takers. So rumors start spreading. There's all sorts of misinformation that starts spreading. At around 12:45 p.m., one of the owners, who is one of the hostages, he convinces the hostage takers to leave them all out of the line of sight, out of the line of fire of the police in this one specific corner of the store. Now, the reason he does this is because he knows that there's a stairwell on the other side of a very thin drywall wall. So it's about a half an inch thick, and it's hidden from view of where they are. But when the hostage takers go to investigate the sounds of, the drilling equipment being moved into the furniture store next door, the hostages, they break through the wall and they go up to the roof. Now, the emergency services unit officers are able to get to them from an adjoining roof. They lower a ladder down, and all 9 hostages are suddenly out of the situation. They're rescued. They've escaped. The hostage takers attempt to reach the roof from another stairwell, but they're not able to because in part of securing this smaller scene, that stairwell has been barricaded off. So the hostages are now secure. The NYPD and all of the people helping them, they can prepare for the possibility of something big happening in case there's a last stand attempt. There is some gunfire that takes place through the store. Doesn't have any effect, doesn't reach anyone. And around 4:55 p.m., the 4 hostage takers, 3 of them are still upright, one's on a cot, they say a prayer, and they exit the store and surrender to the police. They're all apprehended, and the wounded man is taken to Kings County Hospital to take care of his injuries. And as weirdly as this all began, it's over. So
That's interesting, isn't it?
yeah, it's wild to me.
The hostages ended up saving themselves.
Yep.
And when they no longer had hostages, the perpetrators surrendered.
Right.
Which is, the reason people take hostages, perpetrators take hostages, is to get police to listen as opposed to just killing them all, right?
Yeah.
And they have no bargaining chips if they don't have innocent lives hanging in the balance. I just want to point out that there were 12 initially. I think you said it to begin with. 12 initially. The Human Shield owner that was taken out, he escaped, and then you said 2 high school students escaped.
1 high school student escapes, and then they let out. I don't know if the other owner was counted. I know when they go back into the building, there's 12 inside with them. 1 escapes. 1 is used as 2 are used in a trade, over time.
Okay.
And it's really hard to get a take on who's who.
Well, the number changed, right. And I just wanted to point out that none of the hostages died.
Right. They don't die. There are 9 people left. There are 3 people that are either exchanged for what the hostage takers think they need. There's a couple of people that I was a little confused as to how they counted. I think we would have been at 14. 1 store owner escapes in that initial retreat. And then we have a high school student that escapes and gives information to the police. And then we're left with 12 in the building, but 3 of them come out along the way in exchanges.
Right. So the number didn't decrease because any of them were dead. So right. All the people that were taken hostage, actually everybody left, right? The perpetrators surrendered. The hostages saved themselves. It's over.
It's over. Yeah. So In 1974, they all go on trial in Brooklyn, New York. The defense says that, exactly as I kind of described earlier, that they were afraid of the black Muslims and the Nation of Islam, and like there was going to be this crazy uprising that was brought on by the January 18th killings of 7 Sunni Muslims in Washington, D.C. That's the defense. Whether that's real or not, we don't know. And the defense also said that the standoff only goes down because of the first shooting, and they say it was the NYPD. You and I believe that it's probably the hostage takers, but whatever is going on there, one of them is basically shot in the belly, and that is, it sort of triggers their retreat, being like, in their mind, like they have to stay and do what they're doing because now it's escalated to violence.
Right. And, I don't know who shot. It just seems more likely that it wasn't the police, especially since they held their fire pretty much, except for the direct attack, like when it started and then when Gilroy was killed, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it would, but probably wasn't them.
There was an argument made at trial that Gilroy could have potentially been killed by a ricochet during a friendly fire mishap. There's not really evidence presented, but the defense very much tries to make it seem like very few shots were fired at people by the 4 perpetrators. So June 21st, 1974, the jury is made up of 10 white jurors, 2 black jurors. They find these defendants guilty of 41 counts and not guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder, of the wounding of the police officers, 1 charge of first-degree assault with a deadly weapon on one of the police officers, and there's a handful of counts that are like illegal possession of a weapon. Something technically was wrong with the weapons charges and the way that it was written up, so it ends up sort of being dropped as opposed to them being found not guilty. And these guys, if I understand correctly, Al-Musaddiq gets out in 1998, so 24 years later. The public isn't made aware of this. They find out when he dies in 2003. Rahim is still alive.
Rahim was convicted of Gilroy's murder.
Right.
Just FYI, I don't know. I can't remember if you said that or not.
I may not have. He doesn't get out till 2010. So he definitely serves the longest sentence, I believe. No, Rahman and Rahim are convicted of Gilroy's murder. They get the longest sentence. Rahim gets out in 2010 on parole. And I've read that he's a social worker. Don't know how accurate that is. Rahman is released in 2019. Abdullah does not get out. He ultimately has a stroke in October 2020. He passes away. He served 40 years in prison. More than 40 years.
It's interesting because Rahim was convicted of Gilroy's murder, but in 2008, so 2 years before he got out, he expressed his regrets.
Is that the I'm not an animal thing?
He actually said at his parole hearing, I wish there was some way I could go back to the moment I decided to enter the store. I'm not an animal. I understand the pain I caused, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of humanity expressed for these particular people. It's so wild that all of this is basically because of them trying to exit the store with stolen firearms.
Right, which would make it a provoked attack because it's very, very interesting. And to transport ourselves back to, 1973, we can't do that. However, you've got a situation where they thought they were somehow entitled to steal weapons to defend themselves against a situation that could possibly happen, that happened the previous day to people they had stuff in common with, right?
Yeah.
And the solution would be you just go buy your weapons, right?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why they felt they were entitled to steal them, but it all got out of hand, right?
Yeah, it absolutely did.
I have to say that I feel like I don't know what the difference was, but Abdullah dying in October 2020, he suffered a stroke at his 14th parole hearing.
Yeah, I never have figured out exactly.
I don't think they had remorse.
If you look at the sentences, they are primarily based on Gilroy's death and the different levels of culpability related to Gilroy's death. But ultimately, these guys were not really, they were sentenced in a way that, like, the idea was we don't want them out of prison.
Yeah.
If you go and read about this online, which I encourage people to do because this is a cool story, it's a tragic situation, but it's also a cool story because it is literally the birthplace of like a huge amount of changes in the way federal and state and local law enforcement officers handle hostage negotiations. This is like later in this year, the first hostage negotiation unit is going to be developed and implemented in the New York Police Department. And it's going to change how everybody does their hostage negotiations.
Which is really interesting because the hostages save themselves.
Hostages save themselves. You're 100% right. It is not a successful negotiation overall. Another key element here, just keep that in mind. That
I guess they felt like it was, though, for some reason.
well, it causes a rift in the New York Police Department because a lot of New York police officers at the time felt like what you do with people who do these things or kill them, primarily because an officer is killed.
Well, sure. But see, in my opinion, and this is my morning speculative quarterbacking, you let the perpetrators, I feel like they took the owner that they took as the human shield to begin with because they saw the police coming, right?
Yeah.
And if they had just let them leave with the guns,
Yeah.
then they could have arrested them for stealing the guns, and like they wouldn't have had this whole situation happen.
Yeah.
Because, and I feel like I don't actually know what the protocol is now, but it's almost like police presence causes hostage situations.
That's interesting because it really would have just been an armed robbery without it. It definitely was not a planned hostage situation.
No, it wasn't. And see, they could have retrieved the merchandise, right?
Yeah.
They could have had somebody, follow them without, because my understanding is they converged on the store because the silent alarm went off, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a mistake anyway, because most of the time people committing those types of, they have no interest in hurting the people in the store, right? They just want their guns. They're stealing them, just like people who go in banks. They just want the money, right?
Yeah.
And the police presence causes them to have to use something for leverage, and the leverage always ends up being the innocent people that are standing by.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept, especially now. Technology is different, but they absolutely could have let those guys think they got away with the guns and then taken them all down without any of this happening.
Yeah.
But they weren't thinking like that back then.
No, not at all. There's definitely a 1970s into the early 80s change in like the mentality of law enforcement in the United States, and it continues to evolve today. I still think they get a lot of the personnel issues that law enforcement have are sort of predicated on some ancient nonsense. And like we end up with cops who never should have been police officers in the first place. Like that's true kind of universally. And it's still true in 2025, although I don't agree with the huge shift I've noticed like recently into, like there's got to be some balance there that we have not yet arrived at that balance in the United States.
Oh, definitely not. But I don't, you said it's still present here in 2025. I think it'll be present forever. It's human nature.
Yeah.
And we don't have a handle on exactly how to tell what it is enough to weed it out at any point in time. Plus, it's so different all across the country, right?
Right.
And there is no, each police department gets to hire their own officers, and you hope that they want to protect and serve, right? It's just, for whatever reason, I think it's more of an on-the-job training type thing. A lot of times, if you've got one bad apple, it spoils the whole bunch, right? But there are good cops out there.
Oh, 100%,
yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like all I ever encounter are the bad ones. But I have to say, this is a good illustration of sort of like, the two sides, because you had the one guy who nobody knew he had I think you said a doctorate, a PhD in clinical psychology.
Yeah.
And so he had his way of doing it. I feel like a lot of law enforcement given their rathers, they have a trigger type response, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And that's why they have, a order of command, and like they can't just make their own decisions. They have to follow their supervisor, who has to follow their supervisor, and so on and so forth. But I do think that it takes a little bit of that type of personality, I guess, to even want to be a police officer to begin with, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
And that's a really hard thing to balance. I've always said that if firemen were police officers, the world would be a way more balanced place.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. And I do think there are good cops out there. And this is a very interesting illustration of the different, good, bad, and different of how different people would have handled it.
Yeah, I agree.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS. True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.